Hello and welcome. This is a B1 English story to listen to as you fall asleep. Find a comfortable position now, wherever you are. If you're in bed, let the covers settle around you. If you're lying down, let your body sink a little heavier into the surface beneath you. You don't need to hold anything up right now. Not your shoulders, not your jaw, not your thoughts. Just rest. If you listen to story 1, you might recognize someone tonight. A woman with silver hair and bright, curious eyes, and a recipe that came from her mother. If this is your first time here, don't worry at all. This story stands completely on its own. Tonight we follow a young woman called Sue Jin on the day she arrived somewhere she had never been before. Take one slow breath in and let it go, and let the story begin. Sue Jin had not slept on the plane. She had tried. She had the window seat, which she had specifically requested when she booked the ticket 3 months earlier, sitting at her desk at home with a cup of tea that had gone cold. She had imagined herself sleeping against the cool oval of the window, wrapped in the thin airline blanket, waking somewhere over Europe feeling refreshed and calm. Instead, she had watched 4 films, eaten a small bread roll and a portion of pasta that was fine, and then not fine, and then fine again, and spent a long time looking out at the dark. Below the plane, occasionally, there were the scattered lights of cities she didn't know the names of. She found herself wondering about those lights, about who was awake down there and why, and what they were doing at this particular hour. Whether any of them ever looked up at the sky and noticed the blinking light of a passing plane and wondered about the people inside. Probably not, she thought. Probably they were simply getting on with things, the way people do. At some point around 3 in the morning, by her body clock, the cabin grew very quiet. The overhead lights were dimmed, and most people were asleep. She could hear the constant, low hum of the engines, and after a while she stopped noticing it, the way you stop noticing any sound that doesn't change. She pressed her forehead against the cold window and looked out. The sky was beginning to change. At the very edge of the horizon, where the dark met the dark, there was the faintest suggestion of blue. Not quite light yet, just the possibility of light. She watched it for a long time. The blue deepened, then warmed towards grey, then very slowly, impossibly slowly, towards a thin line of gold at the bottom of the world. She thought, somewhere out there, a new day is beginning, and in a few hours she would be in it. She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders, closed her eyes, and still didn't sleep. But for the first time since the plane had lifted off the ground, she felt something close to calm. She felt the wheels touch the runway before she heard the sound of it, a bump, and then the long roaring rush as the engines slowed the plane. Outside the window, grey tarmac moved past, very fast, then slower, then slow, and then the plane was simply rolling forward between other aircraft parked in neat rows, with flat, pale morning light over everything. She pressed her face close to the glass, wanting to see as much as she could. The airport was large and bright and slightly overwhelming. Signs in English pointed in every direction, and crowds of people moved with great purpose. Families, business people, students with enormous backpacks. She joined the queue for passport control, which took 25 minutes. She had her documents ready, her passport, her letter of acceptance from the university, her visa. The officer looked at her, then at the photograph, then back at her, and stamped the passport without a word. She was through. She collected her suitcase from the carousel and recognized it immediately by the small yellow ribbon tied to the handle. Her mother had suggested the ribbon before she left. "So you don't pick up the wrong one," her mother had said, as though any of the other suitcases were identical, as though Su Jin was the kind of person who made that sort of mistake. She had laughed at the time. Now, watching the yellow ribbon come around the bend of the belt, she felt a sudden sharp warmth for her mother. For the particular way her mother thought about things, always practical, always careful, always 2 steps ahead. She lifted the suitcase off the belt, took a slow breath, and walked through the doors marked "Nothing to Declare." The first thing Sujin noticed was the smell. Not a bad smell, just different. Earthy and green, and faintly sweet. Like rain on warm stone. Like the air just after a garden had been cut. She stood outside the terminal building with her suitcase and breathed it in for a moment. The sky above her was a pale grey with a thin brightness behind it. The kind of sky that might become anything, that might stay grey all day or might open up into something surprising. She didn't know yet. She was still learning the weather here. She was still learning everything. When she turned towards the bus stops, she caught a different smell entirely. Diesel smoke mixed with something slightly sweet and artificial from a group of people nearby who were vaping. A man in a high visibility jacket walked past with a paper cup of coffee, and the smell of it reached her for just a moment before it was gone. She found the bus stop, joined the small queue that had already formed, and checked her coat pocket for the piece of paper with the address on it. It was there. Her phone had 17% battery. She had enough English to get by, she hoped. The bus into the city centre took 40 minutes, and Su Jin spent almost all of it with her forehead resting lightly against the window, watching. She had a window seat again. Some habits are worth repeating, and the cool glass against her skin kept her present, kept her from drifting into the tiredness that was beginning to pull at the edges of her thoughts. Row after row of red brick houses passed by, each one nearly identical to the last, with small front gardens in various states of order. Some were neat and tidy, with low hedges and flower pots by the door. Others were overgrown with long grass and a forgotten bicycle leaning against the gate. One had a bright pink rose growing up over the front door, still flowering somehow, impossibly, in the cold, and she watched it until it passed out of sight. She noticed washing on the lines in back gardens, white sheets moving slowly in the wind, a pair of jeans, a row of children's socks alternating red and blue. She found herself thinking about the person who had hung them there that morning, getting up while it was still half dark, loading the machine the night before, doing the ordinary, continuous work of a life. She liked that thought, all these people doing their ordinary things, not knowing a young woman from very far away was passing their garden on a bus, noticing their washing. A man walked a very small dog on the pavement below. The dog was wearing a coat. A coat, she thought, and almost laughed, not unkindly, just with surprise. The dog did not seem embarrassed by this at all. It trotted along with great dignity, as though a coat was the most natural thing in the world for a dog to be wearing on a November morning. She passed a school where children in matching yellow t-shirts were eating lunch outside despite the cold, running between tables, chasing each other across the playing field. One child stood completely still in the middle of all that movement, looking carefully at something held in both hands. A leaf, maybe, or a stone, something small that had caught their attention entirely. The bus moved on before she could see what it was. She had watched so many British films over the years, listened to so many podcasts, practiced her pronunciation, and read novels set in cities like this one. She thought she had known what England looked like, but seeing it in person was different in ways she hadn't expected. The colours were softer. Not the bright, saturated colours of films, but something quieter and more layered. The greens were deep and complicated. The greys were never just grey, but also blue and silver and sometimes almost purple. And the sky was bigger than she'd imagined, filled with clouds of extraordinary variety. Great stacked towers of white, thin stretched streaks near the horizon, darker patches moving slowly above the rooftops. She watched the clouds and tried to find shapes in them. A dog, no, a horse. Something that was definitely a mountain or possibly a coat. She smiled at that. The guest house was on a quiet street about 10 minutes' walk from the bus station. A narrow terraced house with a dark blue door and a small sign that read, "Rooms available, ring bell." She rang it. A cheerful man named Derek answered almost immediately. He was perhaps 50, with a round face and reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, and the slightly distracted manner of someone who had just been in the middle of something and couldn't quite recall what. He confirmed her name with great enthusiasm, as though her arrival was the best news he'd had all day, and led her up the stairs, which creaked pleasantly with each step. The carpet was dark green with a pattern of small leaves, and the walls of the staircase were hung with framed photographs, black and white images of the town in earlier times, when the streets were emptier and the shop signs were different and the cars were low and rounded. She wanted to stop and look at them properly, but Derek was already at the door of the room 3, pushing it open. The room was small and clean. A single bed with a white duvet, a wooden wardrobe with a mirror on the door, a desk by the window with a lamp, and a small tray holding tea bags, instant coffee, and 2 sachets of hot chocolate. The window looked out onto a garden that was mostly brown and bare at this time of year, but there was a bird feeder on a wooden pole in the middle of the lawn, and 2 small birds were visiting it as she looked, taking seeds, flying away, returning, taking more, in a calm and methodical rhythm. Derek pointed out the towels, the kettle, and finally a small round tin on the desk, with a blue floral pattern on the lid. "Biscuits are in the tin, help yourself," he said, and then he was gone, his footsteps retreating down the creaking stairs. Sujin sat on the edge of the bed. The duvet was soft beneath her hands, and the room was quiet, except for the faint sound of the birds outside. She sat very still and thought, "I am really here." It felt different than she'd expected. Not with excitement, exactly, but with something quieter. A kind of stillness, like the moment after a long journey when the movement finally stops and your body takes time to understand that it has arrived. She opened the tin of biscuits. They were round and buttery and tasted of nothing in particular, which was exactly right. They tasted of somewhere to sit, and that was what she needed. She made a cup of tea with the small kettle, sat by the window with the warm mug in both hands, and watched the birds going about their work until the exhaustion of the journey settled gently and completely into her bones. That evening, she went out to find something to eat. She had slept for 2 hours in the afternoon, a deep, dreamless sleep that left her feeling wrung out and slightly confused about the time, and had woken to find the room filled with the flat blue light of early evening. She splashed cold water on her face, put on her warmest jumper and her coat, and wound her long red scarf around her neck twice. The scarf had been a gift from a friend at home, who said, with great authority, that she would need it in England. She had thought her friend was exaggerating. She had not been exaggerating. The street outside the guest house was quiet, the sky a deep blue grey that was not quite dark, with the street lamps beginning to come on one by one and casting small orange circles on the pavement below. She walked slowly, with no particular destination in mind, simply wanting to move through the place and let it become a little more real to her. She passed a newsagent's with a bright interior and a stand of papers outside, and a laundrette where two women were talking loudly over the sound of the machines, and a pharmacy with a green cross glowing above the door. A small supermarket was still open, and she went in on impulse and bought a bottle of water, some crackers, and a small bunch of yellow flowers from a bucket near the till. She didn't know the name of the flowers. They were simple and cheerful, and she carried them out into the cold evening, feeling slightly better for having them. The main street was longer and livelier, lined with restaurants and cafes, and pubs with golden light falling from their windows onto the pavement. The sound of voices and music spilled out every time a pub door swung open. She passed an Italian restaurant where the smell of garlic and tomato drifted warmly into the street, and a Chinese restaurant that made her smile, not because it was funny, but because it was familiar, a small square of the known world set inside all this strangeness. She stopped for a moment at a bookshop with a window display of new novels and found that she could read most of the titles. She felt a quiet, private pride in that. She kept walking, and as she walked, she became aware of a simple, clear hunger, the kind that cuts through tiredness and makes decisions easy. She wanted something warm, something that felt like being cared for, and then she saw it, a small cafe set slightly back from the street, with hand-painted letters on the window in dark green paint. Homemade soups, open late. And below in smaller letters, all welcome. Through the glass she could see warm yellow light, a few people at tables, and the faint curl of steam rising from bowls. She pushed the door open. The warmth of the cafe met her the moment she stepped inside. Not just heated air, but the deeper warmth of a place where cooking had been happening all day. Warmth that has settled into the walls and the wooden furniture and the low ceiling. A small bell above the door made a soft sound as she entered. The cafe was not large, perhaps 8 tables, most of them occupied, and the walls were painted a warm cream colour with small plants on the windowsills, and a hand-written menu on a chalkboard above the counter. She was still reading it when the woman behind the counter spoke. The woman had short silver hair, cut close to her head, and bright dark eyes that were already smiling before Su Jin had even reached the counter. It was the kind of smile that is simply how some people's faces work, not performed, not deliberate, just there. "First time in Linford," the woman said. Su Jin looked at her, a little surprised. "Is it that obvious?" The woman laughed, warm and short, and leaned forward slightly on the counter. "Just a little. Don't worry. Everyone looks like that when they first arrive." "Like what?" Su Jin asked. "Like you're trying to memorize everything at once." Su Jin laughed because it was so accurate it was almost embarrassing. The woman asked what she could get her, and Su Jin looked at the board, where 4 soups were listed in careful, neat handwriting. She recognized 2, The fourth she didn't know at all, and she pointed to it. The woman's expression warmed further. Ah, that one is a Spanish recipe, my mother's. She described it. Tomatoes slow cooked until they were almost sweet. White beans, smoked paprika, dark leafy greens added near the end. A long, slow cook. It sounds wonderful, Sujin said. Good choice, the woman said simply and turned towards the kitchen. Sujin found a table near the window, unwound her red scarf and placed the small bunch of yellow flowers on the table beside her. Outside, the street was quiet now, with a few people walking past with their hands in their pockets and their shoulders raised against the cold, their breath visible in the air, small clouds appearing and disappearing with each step. She watched them for a while, feeling the particular pleasure of being warm inside while the cold is just on the other side of the glass. The soup arrived in a wide, deep bowl, dark red, the colour of autumn leaves, with a curl of steam rising from the surface. White beans nestled among dark green leaves that were just beginning to wilt in the heat, and a small piece of crusty bread resting on the side. Sujin wrapped both hands around the bowl before she even picked up the spoon, letting the warmth move through her palms. She had been cold without fully realizing it. Now she realized it. The first spoonful was warm, rich, and slightly smoky. The paprika, perhaps, or something else she couldn't quite name. There was a depth to it that only comes from long, slow cooking, from patience, from someone who learned from someone who learned from someone else before them. She ate slowly, tearing the bread and using it to catch the last drops at the edge of the spoon, and around her the cafe was quiet and easy, with faint music from somewhere. Something with a guitar, low and unhurried, and the soft murmur of other people's conversations. She felt her shoulders drop. She hadn't fully realized until that moment how much she had been holding them up, on the plane, in the airport, on the bus, walking through the unfamiliar streets with her suitcase, and her 17% battery, and her piece of paper with an address on it, her body quietly braced against the constant newness of everything. Now, in the warmth of this small cafe with the bowl in front of her, she let all of that tension go slowly and completely, the way a held breath finally releases. At a nearby table, a young woman sat alone. She was perhaps Sujin's age, or a little older, with curly hair and the traces of paint on her hands. Not fresh paint, but the kind that settles into the creases of your knuckles and stays there no matter how many times you wash. She was leaning her head gently against the window, with her eyes half closed, and in front of her were the remains of a meal, an empty bowl, a crust of bread, a glass with just a little left in it. She had the look of someone who had come here with one intention, and found that a completely different intention had taken over. Someone who had ended up here almost by accident and decided on reflection that it was exactly where she needed to be. Sujin watched her for a moment, not intrusively, just with the particular attention you give to people when you're far from home and everyone around you feels slightly precious, slightly significant, as though the world is gently showing you something and you're not yet sure what it is. The woman with the silver hair came by to clear a nearby table and paused beside Sujin's. "How is it?" she asked, nodding at the bowl. "Incredible," Sujin said, and meant it completely. The woman smiled. "My mother made it every Sunday. In Granada, the winters are not so cold, but they are grey, and on a grey day you need something warm." She said it simply, without any drama. "You're from Spain?" Sujin asked. "Granada, yes. I moved here some months ago," the woman said, "to be closer to my daughter." She asked with genuine curiosity where Sujin had come from. And Sujin told her, a very long way, almost 22 hours of travelling when you counted everything, a year at the university on the hill, the first time she had been to England. A year is a good amount of time, the woman said, with the quiet certainty of someone who had moved to new places herself and knows what they require. Enough to really learn a place, to understand its rhythms. I hope so, Sujin said. You will, the woman said, and something in the way she said it, not as reassurance but as simple fact, made Sujin believe her entirely. Before she left, Sujin asked her name. Clara, the woman said, and then, and yours? Sujin, Clara repeated it carefully, getting the sounds right, giving each part its proper weight, as though it mattered, because it did. Welcome to Linford, Sujin, Clara said, and went back to the kitchen. Sujin walked back through the quiet streets slowly, in no hurry at all. The cold was sharper now, and her breath made small, visible clouds in the air in front of her as she went. She pulled her red scarf tighter. Her friend had been entirely right about the scarf, and carried the small bunch of yellow flowers in one hand, their stems a little cool now, but their faces still turned cheerfully upward, in the way flowers have of looking for light, even when there is very little of it. She stopped again outside the bookshop. The window was dark, the interior closed up for the night, but in the faint glow of the street lamp she could still make out the covers of the novels in the display. She stood for a moment and thought, I will come back here. It was a good thought, a forward-looking thought, the kind that belongs to someone who intends to be somewhere for a while, who is already, quietly and without fanfare, beginning to make a place their own. Back at the guest house, the blue door was lit from above by a small lamp and looked warm and reliable in the dark. Inside, the hallway smelled of old carpet and, faintly, of something baked drifting up from wherever Derek spent his evenings. She climbed the creaking stairs, and this time she did stop at the old photographs on the wall, leaning in to look at them in the low light. There was the same street she had just walked down, but 50 years ago or more. Fewer cars, different signs on the shops, but the same buildings, the same curve of the road, the same sky above everything. Time moves, she thought, and things stay. Both things are true at once. In room 3, the yellow flowers went into the tooth mug on the bathroom shelf with water. Not quite right for flowers, but good enough. They looked cheerful against the white wall. She put on her pyjamas, got into bed, and lay on her back looking at the ceiling while the duvet slowly warmed around her. The room was quiet. Outside, a car moved slowly down the street and was gone. Then, distant and unhurried, a church clock struck the hour. 8 slow notes, each one fading fully before the next arrived, and then silence. She let the day move through her mind without directing it, just letting it go where it wanted to go. The plane descending through the clouds, the smell of England, earthy and green and faintly sweet, and how she had stood outside the terminal and simply breathed it in. The bus and the red brick houses, and the dog in its coat walking with such dignity. Derek with his reading glasses and his tin of biscuits. The birds at the feeder in the bare November garden, going about their work with that calm and methodical ease. And the cafe, the warmth in its walls, the wide bowl, the dark red soup, and Clara, who had moved to a new city herself, who made her mother's recipe because some things feel like home wherever you are, who had said her name carefully, getting the sounds right, as though it mattered. She thought about home, not with sadness, not exactly, but with a kind of tenderness, the way you think about something beloved that is at a comfortable distance. She thought about her mother, who had tied a yellow ribbon on a suitcase just in case. She thought about how familiar home had become, so familiar that she had stopped really seeing it. The way you stop truly looking at the things you pass every day. And now she was somewhere new, where everything was slightly different, and her eyes had been wide open from the moment she arrived. She thought, I'm going to be okay here. Not just okay, she felt, with a quiet surprise that seemed like the very beginning of something. That she might come to love it, in time, little by little, the way you come to love anything new, by paying attention, by showing up, by letting it become yours. She closed her eyes. The church clock was silent. Outside, the yellow flowers stood in their tooth mug, quietly doing what flowers do, which is simply to be there. Let the story settle now. Let your breathing slow. Sujin arrived somewhere she had never been before. She was tired and a little uncertain, but she was curious, and she noticed everything. The colours, the smells, the sounds. She found a warm cafe. She met a woman called Clara, who made her mother's soup, and said her name carefully, as though it mattered. Sujin ate slowly and felt her shoulders drop. She walked home through the quiet streets and thought, I'm going to be okay here. And she was right. Arriving somewhere new is always like this. Strange at first, and then slowly a little more familiar, a little more yours. Every place you have ever loved was once somewhere you had never been. Think of a place that is yours now, somewhere you love, that was once completely new to you. Remember the first time you saw it, how strange it was, how much you noticed, and how slowly it became familiar. Let that feeling move gently through you now. The feeling of arriving, the feeling of beginning. Your body is warm and heavy. Your breathing is slow. The day is done. You are exactly where you need to be. Let the words drift away now, like breath in cold air, visible for a moment and then gone. Good night. Sleep well.